The scene was set at a busy airport, the bustling sound of travelers moving through the terminals drowned out by the harsh beeping of security checkpoints. Among the sea of faces, one stood out, a well-dressed, confident woman of color. She was not just any passenger, she was a major player in the global financial scene. Her name was Danielle Turner, a seasoned venture capitalist from New York, known for her acumen in securing massive investments across the world. On this particular day, Danielle was about to board a flight for a critical business meeting in Silicon Valley. What should have been a routine journey soon turned into a life-altering moment. As she made her way to the gate, a sudden and forceful interruption stopped her in her tracks. Security officers approached her, demanding that she step aside. Confused, Danielle complied, unaware of what was about to unfold. As the officers started questioning her, their tone was unnecessarily hostile, and it became evident they were accusing her of something she hadn't done. It wasn't until they aggressively told her to leave the plane that she realized they had no justification for their actions. "We have to remove you from the plane, ma'am," one officer said curtly, his eyes scanning her with disdain. Danielle's blood ran cold, but her expression never faltered. She calmly asked why she was being asked to disembark, but the officers couldn't provide a reasonable answer. Their actions seemed unjustified, even racially charged, and in that moment Danielle realized something crucial. This wasn't just about her. It was about a system of inequality that she had seen time and time again. She was taken off the plane, humiliated in front of a crowd, but this was only the beginning. What no one in that airport realized was that Danielle Turner wasn't just any ordinary woman. She wasn't someone who would accept injustice quietly. She was a person of immense power, with the financial backing and connections to make waves. And that day, she was about to turn the tables on the airline and on the very system that had wronged her. As she walked away from the gate, the wheels of a much bigger plan began turning in Danielle's mind. The moment she left the airport, she picked up her phone and began calling her contacts, high-profile investors, business moguls, and influential figures who trusted her judgment. But this wasn't just about her reputation. No, it was about holding a major corporation accountable for its actions. Danielle wasn't going to let this go quietly. She contacted a number of powerful organizations and law firms, setting a plan in motion that would take down the airline. But it wasn't just about getting compensation for the humiliating incident she'd experienced. No, this was about making the airline and everyone involved pay for their blatant disrespect. Days later, the airline's executives received a call they never expected. Danielle had already begun making moves behind the scenes, leveraging her position and her networks. She had managed to pull off something unimaginable. She had secured a deal that would cost the airline more than they could have ever prepared for. The deal was shocking, to say the least. In exchange for the injustice she suffered, Danielle demanded a staggering 70 tons of gold from the airline, a sum that was far beyond the reach of most corporations. The demand sent shockwaves through the financial world. Many doubted whether the airline would comply, but Danielle wasn't bluffing. She had the resources, the power, and the determination to see this through. The airline, already struggling with public backlash from the incident, had no choice but to concede. The deal was sealed, and Danielle became a symbol of resilience, showing that even in the face of systemic injustice, a single individual with the right influence could bring an empire to its knees. The moment was poetic. The airline, once untouchable, now found itself in a financial crisis, scrambling to secure its future. Danielle, on the other hand, was able to secure an unprecedented amount of wealth in gold, not for herself, but for future investments that would change the game forever. The balance of power had shifted, and the world was watching. Danielle's message was clear. Never underestimate the power of a determined individual who is willing to fight for what's right. What started as a personal affront turned into a masterstroke of strategy and financial prowess, forever altering the course of the airline's history and proving that sometimes it takes only one person to expose the cracks in a seemingly indestructible system. Danielle Turner knew that her fight didn't end at the airport. She wasn't about to let a powerful airline, one that treated her like an invisible, inferior being, get away with this kind of injustice. The more she thought about the way the security guards had treated her, the more furious she became. She had been humiliated, disrespected in front of strangers, and singled out for something that was purely based on her race and gender. But she knew better than to let her emotions dictate her next move. Danielle was a strategist, a seasoned businesswoman who had built a career on making the right moves at the right time. And now was her moment. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Danielle, still furious but calm and calculating, immediately took to her phone, contacting key players in her network. Her first call was to her top lawyer, someone who had helped her navigate the most complex deals. They spoke briefly, but it was enough. They were going to make this a case that couldn't be ignored. The law firms and legal departments were already on it, but she knew that wasn't enough. She needed to make this personal, and she needed to make it hurt. She tapped out a quick message to her top financial contacts. This isn't just about me anymore. This is about a system of inequality that needs to be torn down. We're going to hit them where it hurts, their finances. Danielle's phone buzzed constantly. Investors, allies, and partners wanted to know more. What was her plan? How could they help? They were all eager to get on board. The airline was huge, but so was Danielle's network, and her reputation had been built on being unshakable. Her next move would leave them reeling. And just like that, the seeds were planted. Danielle spent the next few days pulling strings, working quietly behind the scenes. She reached out to top financial institutions, other airlines, and major corporations, but this was no longer just about one airline. Danielle knew she could leverage this opportunity to make a statement. She wasn't just going to take a settlement and walk away. This was her chance to change everything. If she played her cards right, this wasn't just a lawsuit for financial compensation. It was going to shake the airline industry to its core. The rumors started circulating quickly. The airline, still reeling from the fallout of the public incident, tried to hush it up, hoping it would blow over, but Danielle's next move would ensure it never would. She began drawing up a deal, one that would change the course of the airline's future forever. The terms were shocking, almost unfathomable to anyone who didn't understand just how powerful Danielle had become. She wasn't asking for a simple payout. No, Danielle demanded something far more valuable. She wanted 70 tons of gold, a sum that would bankrupt many of the world's wealthiest corporations. The demand was bold, even for someone as powerful as Danielle, but it was exactly the kind of statement she needed to make. She wasn't just looking for a quick victory. She wanted to change the way things were done, to hold a massive corporation accountable for its actions. Her contacts were stunned when they saw the numbers. Some hesitated, wondering if this was too much, but Danielle's vision was clear. She wasn't playing a game of negotiation. This was war, and in her mind, she had already won. The airline was desperate to maintain its public image. They were under fire from multiple directions now. Investigations were beginning, media outlets were picking up the story, and customers were expressing their outrage. Danielle knew that the time was ripe for her demands. Soon the call came. The airline's executives were shaken, and after some tense deliberations, they agreed to meet her terms. They could no longer afford to fight this in the court of public opinion, especially when the financial fallout from such a request would be catastrophic. The deal was struck, and just like that, Danielle Turner had secured her victory. The airline, once brimming with confidence, was now forced to comply with a demand so outrageous that the world watched in disbelief. Danielle didn't just get compensation for the humiliation she suffered. She took 70 tons of gold, enough to transform her business portfolio into something unprecedented. But it wasn't about the gold. It was about the message. Danielle had shown the world that power wasn't just about money or status. It was about knowing how to use the system to your advantage and making sure that when injustice happened, you were the one to flip the script. The financial world, already accustomed to her shrewdness, watched as Danielle's influence skyrocketed. But for Danielle, the real victory was in knowing that she had struck a blow against the system that had once worked to hold her down. This wasn't just about taking down a single airline. It was about showing the world that no one, no matter how big, could stand in her way when she set her sights on a goal. Her message was clear. You can't silence a woman who knows her worth and is willing to fight for what she deserves. As she stood in front of the press after the deal was finalized, Danielle couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The cameras flashed, but it wasn't for the gold she had secured. It was for the power she had reclaimed. The moment she had been waiting for had finally arrived, and the world would never see her, or anyone like her, the same way again. Her story wasn't just about victory. It was about breaking barriers, making a statement, and showing that when you're as determined as Danielle Turner, even the most powerful corporations can be brought to their knees. Danielle Turner's plan was far from over. The airline might have caved, agreeing to her audacious demand, but she wasn't about to let this moment slip into history without shaking the very foundation of corporate America. As the ink dried on the agreement, Danielle took a step back, looking at the horizon from her office in New York, the skyline reflecting the exact type of power she was determined to wield. She had already proven that no one could trample over her without consequences, but now it was time to turn the tables on an entire system that had thrived on injustice and inequality for far too long. Word of her victory spread like wildfire. The media buzzed with stories of Danielle's triumph. Headlines declared her the woman who had single-handedly forced one of the largest airlines to hand over 70 tons of gold, an amount so staggering that even seasoned financial analysts had trouble grasping the weight of it. But for Danielle, the gold was never the true prize. The message, the statement, was what truly mattered. She had shown the world that a single, well-executed move could unmask the power structures that had kept marginalized voices suppressed for years. Her phone rang constantly, day and night, as people from all over the world reached out to her, business moguls, politicians, activists, each one eager to discuss their next big move. But Danielle's attention wasn't on the calls or the emails flooding her inbox. She was already thinking several steps ahead. She knew that the real battle was just beginning. The airline had crumbled under the weight of her demand, but Danielle had bigger plans in mind. Her victory had exposed a systemic issue, and now she wanted to make sure the world knew exactly what was going on behind closed doors. She began assembling a team of experts, a group of fearless lawyers, financial analysts, and investigative journalists who shared her vision for dismantling the corporate oligarchies that thrived on exploiting the underprivileged. Danielle was determined to hold the airline accountable, but she also wanted to expose a broader network of systemic corruption that she knew stretched far beyond just one company. This wasn't just about financial compensation or public revenge. It was about systemic change. The next few weeks were spent quietly, but her influence began to spread across industries. Corporate leaders who had once overlooked Danielle's power now watched her with a mixture of fear and admiration. Some tried to distance themselves, others scrambled to build alliances with her. But Danielle was no one's puppet, and she wasn't looking for validation. She was here to redefine the game entirely. She knew that for all the victory she had secured in the public eye, there were still those working behind the scenes to suppress her message. They didn't want the truth to get out. They didn't want others to learn that corporations could be held accountable when they crossed the line. To them, Danielle was a threat. But Danielle had something they didn't have, the ability to see the future. And what she saw was a wave of change that could reshape the very fabric of corporate power in America. The next phase of her plan was underway. Danielle didn't waste time on superficial victories. She was already working on the financial and legal strategies that would send shockwaves through the industry. While the airline and its executives scrambled to pick up the pieces, Danielle's team had already begun compiling documents, pulling records and gathering the evidence they needed to expose the corrupt practices hidden within not only the airline industry, but several other major corporations. Her ultimate goal was nothing short of revolutionizing the way these companies operated, forcing them to answer for their actions in the most public way possible. Meanwhile, a new battle was brewing. Danielle had become a target. The threat started small, almost like whispers. Someone close to her got a strange call from a number she didn't recognize, telling them to stay away from Danielle. The calls got more frequent. But Danielle wasn't afraid. She'd known the risks from the very start. To challenge the system was to invite conflict. But this wasn't the first time she'd stared down a threat and walked away victorious. But there was something deeper at play. Her network of powerful allies was growing, and her message was being heard by people far beyond the corporate world. Activists, community leaders, and everyday citizens were rallying behind her, inspired by her refusal to back down. They recognized that her victory wasn't just a personal triumph. It was a call to action for anyone who had ever been silenced by a system that didn't care. And that's when Danielle realized that this wasn't just her fight, it was their fight, too. One evening, as she sat in her office going through a set of documents, she received another call, this time from an anonymous source. The voice on the other end of the line was low, hurried. "You don't know who I am," the person said, "but we've been watching. What you've done is bigger than you realize. They're scared. They're planning something to shut you down. Be ready." Before she could ask for more details, the line went dead. Danielle knew then that the battle wasn't just about the gold or the settlements. It was about protecting what she had started, protecting the people who had started believing that the system could be changed, and she wasn't about to back down. Danielle Turner wasn't just a businesswoman anymore. She was a movement. The world would never be the same after this, and neither would she. With every step she took, Danielle made sure the people around her knew one thing: there would be no stopping her. The wave had already started. It wasn't about 70 tons of gold anymore. It was about the massive shift in power she was about to ignite. And if they thought she was just going to fade into the background, they had another thing coming. Because Danielle Turner had only just begun. Danielle Turner's game plan had always been about more than just winning. It was about making a statement, reshaping the rules, and showing the world that no one, no corporation, no matter how powerful, could escape accountability. As the dust settled from her victorious negotiation with the airline, a deeper realization began to settle in Danielle's mind. This wasn't just about the gold. It was about the message she was sending to the corporate elite. They couldn't hide behind their wealth and power anymore. Not if she had anything to say about it. The weeks following the deal were a whirlwind of activity. But as Danielle sat at her desk in her high-rise office in downtown New York, the magnitude of what she had accomplished began to sink in. Her phone was constantly buzzing with messages, some congratulatory, others with a sense of urgency, as people from all corners of the business world, government, and activist circles sought to align with her growing influence. There was no turning back now. The whole world had seen how one woman could take on the mighty airline, and the ripple effect was felt everywhere. But Danielle wasn't interested in basking in the glory. She was already planning her next moves. Her win against the airline had exposed a truth too dangerous for the corporate world to ignore. When push came to shove, someone with the right determination and strategy could knock down even the most powerful giants. She wasn't going to stop there. The financial windfall of 70 tons of gold was just the beginning. Her real goal was far more ambitious. It was time to dismantle the culture of impunity that allowed corporations to operate without any real consequences. The first step was building an even bigger network of allies. Danielle knew that one of the most powerful tools she had was her ability to unite people who had a vested interest in breaking the status quo. She reached out to other business leaders, to whistleblowers within the system, and to anyone who had been personally affected by the reckless behavior of corporations. She knew that this wasn't just her fight, it was the fight of anyone who had ever been silenced or dismissed by those in power. Together, They could bring about a change that would be felt for generations. As her network grew, so did the risks. Danielle's victory had rattled more than just the airline. It had sent shockwaves through the entire business world. Now there were whispers of retaliation. Some of her allies warned her that the powers that be would come for her, that she had become a threat to everything they held dear. But Danielle wasn't afraid. She had been through too much, faced too many obstacles to let fear dictate her action. If they wanted to come after her, they would find her ready. The next few weeks were spent gathering information, doing what Danielle did best, planning, researching, and strategizing. She wasn't just focused on the airline anymore. She was setting her sights on the larger picture. She began digging into other companies, other industries, looking for patterns of abuse, corruption, and exploitation. The truth was, Danielle had seen the same story play out again and again, the rich and powerful profiting from the labor and misery of the vulnerable, with no one ever stepping up to hold them accountable. As the pressure mounted, Danielle kept her head cool. She had made her mark, but now she had to solidify her position. She wasn't just a businesswoman anymore, she was a force to be reckoned with. And for the first time in her life, Danielle realized that this wasn't just about getting what she deserved. It was about shifting the power dynamic and giving others a voice in a world that had long silenced them. But things weren't as simple as they seemed. As Danielle moved forward with her plans, she began to notice something unsettling. Someone was watching her. At first, it was small things, strange calls, unusual emails, people she didn't recognize showing up at her events. She brushed it off as paranoia. But then it escalated. One evening, while walking through her office building, Danielle overheard a conversation she wasn't meant to hear. Two men, dressed in suits, were talking in hushed tones just outside the elevator doors. "She's getting too powerful. We need to shut it down before it spirals," one of them said. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She wasn't just fighting corporations anymore. She was up against something much bigger. But Danielle was no stranger to danger. She had always been the one who'd faced the odds and come out on top. She wasn't going to let anyone intimidate her now. Her mind raced as she processed what had just happened. She had been warned, and she was ready. But the moment she stepped out of the elevator that night, something in her shifted. She knew it was time to take things to the next level. She would not be intimidated. She would not back down. The following morning, she called a meeting with her closest allies. It was time to take this fight public. It was time to send a message that couldn't be ignored. Danielle would launch a new initiative, a platform that would hold corporations accountable, give voice to the voiceless, and expose the truth. She knew that her fight wasn't just hers. It was a movement that needed to be heard. As the media began to pick up on her next move, the attention only intensified. More calls came in from people in power, some trying to negotiate, some trying to intimidate. But Danielle stood firm. She was no longer just a businesswoman fighting for her company's survival. She was a woman on a mission to change the world. Her battle had only just begun. And as the days went on, Danielle couldn't shake the feeling that everything she had worked for was about to explode into something far bigger than anyone could have imagined. She was no longer just playing the game. She was rewriting the rules. And she wasn't stopping until every single person who thought they could get away with abusing their power had been held accountable. In the end, Danielle Turner was not just a symbol of one woman's triumph over a powerful corporation. She became a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever felt powerless in a world that favored the rich and powerful. And as long as she stood strong, they would know that change was possible. Danielle Turner sat in her office, the weight of her recent success starting to sink in. The victory against the airline had put her on the map, but now she was faced with a new challenge: how to keep the momentum going. She had proven that one woman with the right strategy could topple a giant, but she knew that bigger battles lay ahead. She wasn't just after money anymore. She was after change. Real, lasting change. And she was going to make sure the world knew that. The calls and emails came flooding in, from powerful allies and even more powerful enemies. Some wanted to partner with her, others wanted to undermine her. But Danielle wasn't intimidated. She knew exactly what she had to do next. Her platform, her movement, needed to grow. The win with the airline was just a stepping stone to something much bigger. She had to build an ecosystem that could sustain itself, that could hold corporations accountable long after her name faded from the headline. She started reaching out to other business leaders who shared her vision, and before long a network of powerful allies began to take shape. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about creating a legacy of change. It was about building a future where power wasn't concentrated in the hands of a few, where corporations didn't get to decide who lived and who suffered. But with that growth came an undeniable truth. The system didn't want to be dismantled, and those who benefited from it were willing to fight back. Danielle knew that the battles were far from over. As she sat at her desk planning her next moves, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, was watching her every move. The whispers in the corridors of power were getting louder. That evening, as she prepared for another round of meetings with her allies, Danielle received an unexpected message, a cryptic email from an anonymous source. It was brief, but its meaning was clear. "They're coming for you." She stared at the message for a long time, trying to make sense of it, but the truth hit her hard. This fight wasn't just about corporate greed or corrupt systems. It was personal. The forces she was up against had names, faces, and they weren't going to back down easily. The next day, as she arrived at her office building, Danielle noticed something different. There was an eerie tension in the air. People she didn't recognize were hanging around, watching. Her security team was on high alert, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was then that she realized just how deep the web of influence went. She was no longer just taking on a single airline, she was challenging an entire network of power, and they weren't going to let her walk away unscathed. As the day wore on, Danielle's instincts kicked in. She called an emergency meeting with her closest allies, knowing that this was no longer just a business battle, it was a war for the future of the system, a war for the future of every person who had ever been trampled on by those in power, and she wasn't about to let them win. In the days that followed, Danielle's life became a constant chess game. Every move she made was scrutinized, every word she said twisted, and every victory she achieved came with a cost. The attacks on her grew more intense, both in the media and behind the scenes. But Danielle had never been one to shy away from a challenge. She had built this movement from the ground up, and she wasn't about to let anyone take it away from her. One evening, as she was reviewing her strategy for the next phase of her plan, she received a phone call. It was her lawyer, his voice tight with urgency. "Danielle, you need to listen to me. We've just found something big. Someone's trying to discredit you and they're getting closer. You need to act fast." Her heart skipped a beat. She had known this day would come, the moment when the people who wanted to stop her would take more drastic measures. But she wasn't ready to let them win. Not now, not ever. The next few days were a blur of activity. Danielle's team worked around the clock, gathering evidence, building alliances, and preparing for the next phase of their plan. But as the pressure mounted, so did the stakes. Danielle had always known that this fight would come with risks, but she hadn't realized just how far those in power were willing to go to protect their interests. It was clear now, this wasn't just about exposing a corrupt airline or collecting 70 tons of gold. This was about something far bigger. This was about the very fabric of the system. About proving that the powerful couldn't get away with treating people like pawns. This was about showing the world that one person could make a difference. Danielle's next move was bold. She decided to take her fight to the media, knowing that the only way to win this battle was to make sure everyone knew what was at stake. She called a press conference, inviting journalists from across the country. The stakes had never been higher. As the cameras flashed and the reporters crowded around her, Danielle stood tall. She knew that this was her moment, not just to tell her story, but to tell the story of everyone who had ever been silenced by those in power. This wasn't just about her, it was about all of us. The room fell silent as Danielle began to speak, her voice calm but fierce. "For too long, those in power have believed they could get away with anything," she said. "They've believed that the system would protect them. But today, I'm here to tell you that the system is broken, and it's time for us to fix it." Her words hung in the air like a challenge, a call to action that no one could ignore. The press conference marked the beginning of a new chapter in Danielle's fight, a fight that would shake the very foundations of power. And as the media coverage spread, the ripple effect was felt far and wide. The world was waking up, and Danielle Turner was leading the charge. As the weeks went by, the pressure on Danielle grew, but with every challenge she became more determined. This wasn't just about corporate accountability anymore. This was about something deeper. It was about justice, and Danielle Turner was going to make sure that justice was served. And so, as her story continued to unfold, Danielle knew that she was on the verge of something monumental. The stakes had never been higher, but she was ready to take on the powerful, ready to fight for what was right, and ready to change the world, one victory at a time. As the story of Danielle Turner unfolded, it became clear that her battle wasn't just about a business victory or a giant corporation being forced to pay the price for its mistakes. It was about much more. Danielle had challenged a broken system, and in doing so, she had ignited a spark of change that could affect generations to come. This wasn't a fight for money, power, or recognition. It was a fight for justice. For those who had been silenced by the powerful, for those who had no voice in a system that was designed to crush them. Danielle's success is a reminder of the incredible power of persistence. She didn't back down even when the forces against her grew stronger. She knew that when you challenge something as entrenched as corporate corruption or systemic inequality, the path is never easy and the stakes are always high. But the moment she stood up, when she dared to speak truth to power, she changed everything. Her story teaches us that no matter the size of the opponent or the obstacles in the way, one person can make a difference. It's easy to feel like we are too small to impact the world, but Danielle proved that with determination, the right strategy, and an unwavering belief in justice, anything is possible. We all have the potential to make an impact, to stand up for what's right, to challenge the systems that have failed us. But we have to be willing to act. We have to believe in ourselves and in the power of our actions. If Danielle Turner's story inspired you, don't let it end here. If you liked the video, hit the comment key 1. Let me know your thoughts, share your story, and tell us what you're ready to take on in your own life. If you didn't quite like it, hit comment key 0. I'm always looking for ways to improve and make these videos even more engaging and meaningful for you. The lesson here is simple. Stand up, speak out, make your voice heard. The world needs more people like Danielle, people who are willing to fight for what's right, no matter the odds. Are you ready to be that person? The next chapter of the story is yours to write.